So here's something wild. There is a girl who became the youngest U.S. figure skating champion in American history. She was 13. Let that sink in. 13 years old, standing on top of the entire country. And when people started digging into how she got there, what her training program looked like, who her coaches were, what federation was guiding her, they found almost nothing. Because her father had quietly built something completely outside the system. No federation support, no traditional coaching structure, no rulebook, just a plan. And it worked better than anything the establishment had ever produced. This is the story of Alysa Liu. And more specifically, it's the story of what her father Arthur Liu actually built when he decided the normal way wasn't good enough. Let's go back to the beginning because the context here is everything. Figure skating in America is not a casual sport. It's a machine. The U.S. Figure Skating Federation, which most people just call USFS, is a massive organization that has been around since 1921. They certify coaches. They approve training facilities. They run the competitive pathway. They decide who gets funding and who doesn't. If you want to compete seriously in the United States, you basically have to work within their system. That's just how it's always been. The pathway is clear. You find a USFS certified coach. You train at an approved facility. You move up through regional competitions, sectionals, nationals. The federation watches you develop. They invest in you if they think you're promising. You become part of their machine. Most elite skaters have entire teams built around them that are deeply connected to that infrastructure. Coaches, choreographers, sports psychologists, nutritionists, all operating within the federation's world. That's how champions are built. At least, that's what everyone assumed. And then Arthur Liu showed up and just didn't do that. Arthur Liu is not a figure skating insider. He's a lawyer. And when his daughter started showing freakish talent on the ice as a very young kid, he didn't hand her off to the establishment. He didn't call up a famous coach and say, "Here, take her." He started studying the sport obsessively. He read everything. He watched tape constantly. He essentially became a self-taught expert on what it takes to build a world-class figure skater. And then he started building a program around Alysa himself. Now before you picture some reckless dad just winging it, understand something. Arthur Liu was strategic in a way that was almost uncomfortable to watch from the outside. He didn't reject expertise. What he rejected was the idea that the federation-approved pathway was the only valid one. He handpicked coaches and technical specialists himself, outside of the traditional network. He ran everything. He controlled the training environment. He decided what Alysa worked on and for how long. He was essentially acting as the general manager of a one-person skating operation. And the thing is, it worked at a level that made the entire figure skating world stop and stare. By the time Alysa was 12, people in skating circles were already whispering about her. She was doing jumps that most senior-level women couldn't do. Triple axels. The jump that has historically separated the great from the truly elite in women's skating. She was landing it consistently at an age when most girls are still figuring out double jumps. Then came 2019, the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. Alysa Liu walks onto the ice, competes against women years older than her, and wins. Becomes the youngest national champion in U.S. history. The crowd goes insane. The skating world is stunned. And suddenly everyone is asking, who trained this kid? Where did she come from? What program is she from? The answer was basically, her dad's program. That he built, outside your system. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the reaction from the skating establishment was fascinating to watch. On one hand, you couldn't argue with the results. She was clearly extraordinary. On the other hand, there was this visible discomfort from people inside the system. Because if one guy, working outside the federation structure, can produce the best skater in the country, what does that say about the structure? It's like if someone walked into a Michelin-starred restaurant and said, "Hey, I taught myself to cook in my garage," and then served a meal that made the head chef question everything he learned in culinary school. The results are right there. But accepting them means accepting that the system might not be the only way. USFS has always had a somewhat uneasy relationship with coaches and programs that operate outside their direct influence. They want oversight. They want safety. They want consistency. Those are not bad things. But it also means there's a cultural push toward conformity in how skaters are developed. Alysa Liu essentially said, I'll take the good parts and leave the parts that don't serve my daughter. Now let's talk about what he actually built, because this part is almost never covered in detail. Alysa didn't just do this alone. Over time, he assembled a rotating cast of technical specialists, people who were among the best at specific things. Jump technique, choreography, spin mechanics. Instead of having one lead coach who oversaw everything the way traditional programs do, he built something more modular. Experts who came in to work on specific elements. It was less like a traditional coaching relationship and more like a consulting model. You bring in the best person for each specific problem. This approach is actually not that unusual in other elite sports. In tennis, for example, top players often hire a primary coach but bring in specialists for serve mechanics, return of serve strategy, fitness. In golf, players have swing coaches and short game coaches and mental coaches. But in figure skating, especially at the junior and youth level, the norm is very much one lead coach who handles everything. Alysa broke that mold. He also controlled the training volume and schedule in ways that were unconventional. Alysa was not grinding 8-hour ice sessions as a young kid the way some elite programs push their athletes. Alysa was thinking about longevity and about keeping the sport enjoyable for her. He understood, maybe better than people inside the system who'd seen so many burnout cases, that a miserable 12-year-old is not going to perform like a champion. And the results through the junior years were just relentless. She kept winning. She kept pushing the technical ceiling of what women's skating was doing. She became the first woman to ever land 2 different quad jumps, the quad lutz and quad flip, in competition. In an era where men were still figuring out how to consistently land quads, a teenage girl was doing 2 of them. And she got there through a program that most of the skating world couldn't quite explain or categorize. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about. There were real costs to operating outside the system. When you are embedded in the federation structure, you get things. You get funding. You get priority ice time at established training centers. You get access to a network of choreographers and skating officials who've seen thousands of skaters and can give you context. You get invited into conversations about how the sport is developing. You get a seat at the table. When you operate outside all of that, you're paying for everything yourself. Every coach, every ice session, every competition trip, every specialist. Alysa Liu is a lawyer, so financial pressure wasn't the issue the way it might be for other families. But most families, even families with a generational talent on their hands, could not replicate what he built simply because of cost. That's a real and uncomfortable truth about what his model actually requires. There's also the politics of skating to consider. Figure skating is a sport where judges matter enormously, where relationships with officials matter, where being inside the system can quietly influence scores in ways that are hard to prove but very easy for insiders to feel. Operating outside the establishment might mean you're skating uphill literally in some competitive environments. Then came 2022. And things got complicated. Alysa was supposed to be at her peak, old enough now to compete at the senior level on the world stage. The Olympics were in Beijing. She qualified for the US team. And the results were not what anyone had hoped. She placed 7th. For a skater who had been so dominant domestically, the international stage exposed things. And around the same time, she announced she was stepping back from competitive skating. Now a lot of people looked at that and said, see, the system would have prepared her better for the international stage. And maybe there's some truth to that. The federation pathway does give you more international competition experience at younger ages. It exposes you to the specific demands of skating under different judging panels, different ice conditions, different competitive formats. But here's the other read, and this is equally valid. She was 16. She'd been carrying the weight of being a prodigy since she was 12. She'd been the face of American women's skating through her entire adolescence. The burnout that hits skaters who went through the traditional system, Gracie Gold, Adam Rippon, so many others who've talked openly about how the sport ground them down, she showed up as stepping back on her own terms. On her own timeline, without being broken by the machine. And then, quietly, she came back. Started competing again. Still young, still talented, Still technically one of the most gifted skaters in the world. And her father's model? Still basically the same. Still doing it his way. What Arthur Liu proved, and this is the thing that should make every sports parent and every sports administrator genuinely think, is that the official pathway is not the only pathway. It is a pathway. It has advantages. It also has costs. It produces some extraordinary athletes and it burns through others at an alarming rate. What he did was look at the system, strip out the parts that didn't serve his daughter, and build something custom. Something that prioritized her technical development without sacrificing her mental health. Something that got incredible results without requiring her to be institutionalized by the federation from the age of 8. Is his model replicable? Honestly, not easily. It requires financial resources most families don't have. It requires a parent who is willing to go all in at a level that is, to be clear, extremely unusual. And it requires a daughter with the kind of talent that makes the whole thing work in the first place. But the fact that it worked at all is remarkable. The fact that a lawyer with no skating background could outbuild the establishment even for a period of years says something loud about the establishment. It says that the system we trust to develop champions might be more about control than it is about development. It might be serving the institution more than it's serving the athletes. Alysa Liu is still young. Her story is not done. And however it ends, the chapter her father wrote, the one where they quietly built their own version of the machine, outside the machine, and then walked into the championships and won, that chapter is going to be studied for a long time. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who showed up without reading the rules.